So in the last class, what did we talk about in the last class? I think we started with the particle or the wave nature of particles, right? So we looked at two experiments, Davison and Germer experiment and the Thomson experiment, and we saw that uh, microscopic particles such as electrons show interference pattern or diffraction patterns, right? So this is what we saw. And then we talked about the de Broglie wavelength and how the wavelength and momentum of the electron are related to each other, right? So this was what we saw in the previous lecture. So today what we are going to do is we are going to look at what are some of the properties of particles versus waves, right? So we are going to compare classical particles, classical waves with quantum particles and quantum wave, or basically quantum particles. Quantum particle shows both particle and wave nature. All right. So we are going to compare these two and see what are the differences, because this difference will become very important when we carry out any measurement. Okay. So let's start. So of course, to look at these differences, we will look at a particular experiment. It was developed by Young. This is called the Young's double slit experiment. Okay. All right. So before we actually look at what that experiment is and what it tells us, let's first just distinguish what is a classical particle and a classical wave and what is a quantum particle. All right. So in a classical particle, the the quantities that you need to define a classical particle or to know its trajectory of motion or anything would be the position vector. So if you know the position vector at any time t, then you know the complete description of the particle, because then you can you know where it is. You can also calculate its velocity if you know the position vector at two different times and stuff like that. But if you want to know the complete description of a wave, then you need two quantities, right? One is the amplitude, the magnitude of the amplitude, which is A, and the other one is the phase, okay, which is phi. And phi is nothing but k dot r minus omega t. So if the wave is dynamic, it is moving in time, it is changing in time, then you need the position vector, you need the wave vector. Wave vector is related to the wavelength of the wave. And oh, okay, sorry about that. So, and you need the angular frequency and time. So, all of this together is the phase of the wave. So, this is represented by the wave function psi. So, this is psi of position vector r, comma t. So, you need this psi wave function. If you know the psi wave function, then you know everything that you need to know about the wave. Okay. And the intensity of the wave is given by the absolute or the modulus square of the wave function. All right. So now we know these. So what we'll do is we'll carry out this, or we'll look at this experiment and we'll see what are the different behaviors in terms of intensity that we get for classical waves, classical particles, and as well as quantum particles. So in a double slit experiment, what happens is there is a source. Okay, the source is going to emit either some particle or some wave, and a certain distance away from the source, there is a wall. The wall has two slits, which is S1 and S2. So these particles or waves that are coming out from the source can pass through these two slits, S1 and S2. And whatever passes through the slits is collected on a photographic plate that is placed a further distance away from this wall that has the slits. So whatever is passing through the slits will be collected on the photographic plate, and then finally you will kind of record the intensity that way. So let's look at the experiment. So in the first case, we look at what happens when S is a source of stream of bullets. So bullets, as you know, is a macroscopic particle. You can actually look at it with naked eye, so you know where it is. You can also calculate its trajectory, you know where it is going to go and all of that. Okay, so if S is a stream of bullets, so this is a classical particle, bullet. So we pass, we are going to, so S is a source that is throwing off bullets from here. And what we'll do is in the first experiment, so we'll carry out 3 variants of the same experiment. In the first variant, S2 is closed and only S1 slit is open. Okay. So since the bullets are coming from S, they cannot pass through S2, but they can pass through S1. So they're going to pass through S1. And what we'll do is we'll now note how many bullets are coming in at this wall every second. Okay, so the intensity of bullets refers to number of bullets arriving at the back screen per second. So we'll count that. How many bullets are arriving per second, that becomes our intensity. So when you count such a thing, you see that intensity is highest at this point, right? So that's why you have a peak here, and it is lowest at the other. It is lower at the other points. Okay, right. In the second variant of the experiment, what we'll do is slit 1 is closed, but slit 2 is open. Okay, so S2 is open. So again, bullets are coming in from the source. Then there is a wall. S1 is closed, S2 is open. So only the bullets can only pass through S2. And now if you calculate the intensity of the bullets, you see the intensity is maximum at this point, and it is getting lower and lower away from this point. Okay. So as you can see that this point corresponds to the middle of the opening of the S2. Similarly, over here, this point corresponds to the middle of the opening of S1. Okay. Now what we can do, we'll have a third variant. The third variant is where both the slits are open. Okay. So S1 is also open, S2 is also open. So when both the slits are open, bullets can pass through both the slits, right? They will pass either through slit 1 or they will pass either through slit 2. And because you are emitting a lot of bullets from the source, some of the bullets will pass through S1 and some of the bullets will pass through S2. In that case, what will happen is the intensity is maximum at this point, which lies, if you compare it with this wall which has the slit, it lies in the middle of the slit, in the middle of the 2 slits, right? So the intensity is highest here. Obviously, because this area will see bullets both from S2 and both from S1, whereas this area will see most of the bullets coming only from S2, and this one will see most of the this area will see most of the bullets coming only from S1. But this area sees bullets coming from both S1 and S2. So of course the intensity over here is maximum. Okay. So now if you calculate the intensity here, it is the combination of the 2 intensities. I is equal to I1 plus I2. So in the first experiment, the intensity was I1, where the bullets were only coming from S1. In the second experiment, the intensity was I2, where the bullets were coming only from S2. And in the third experiment, you get this profile, and this profile, if you compute, it adds up to I1 plus I2. So the total intensity for this experiment is nothing but I1 plus I2. Okay. So this is the case for classical particles. Okay, when classical particles are passing through the slits. Now let us look at classical waves. Okay, so when S is a source of waves. So here we are referring to classical waves. Okay, so normal waves, whatever we know about waves in general from classical physics. So now let's look at the wave. So again, S is a source of wave, which means it is just a beam of light, right? So it is a source of wave. And again, in the first experiment, we have S1 to be open, S2 to be closed. So again, we see that intensity is maximum at this point, and then away from this point, the intensity decreases. Okay, so this is your I1. But what is I1? I1 for wave, because wave is represented by the wave function psi. So the intensity is nothing but the modulus of psi, square of the modulus of psi. And what is square of the modulus of psi? Because wave function is a complex quantity, right? It is a complex variable. So when you write the modulus square, you always have to write it as psi1 star into psi. So psi1 star represents the complex conjugate of a complex number of a complex variable, and psi is that variable itself. So you are multiplying the complex conjugate with itself, right? So this is your I1. Now, similarly, in the second experiment, when slit 2 is open, so S2 is open, S1 is closed. In that case, again, intensity is maximum at this point, and away from this point, intensity decreases. And I2, the intensity profile I2 is given by psi2 square. So this is the wave function psi2 coming from the slit S2. Okay, so this is psi2 square. Now in the third experiment, when both slits are open, okay, so what will happen? The wave will travel like this, and it will reach slit 1 and slit 2. And when it reaches here, from slit 1 again, it will start propagating, and from slit 2 also it will start propagating. So at some points there will be constructive interference, and at some point there will be destructive interference. And because of that, you will see these oscillatory intensity pattern. Okay, so this kind of an intensity pattern, that is like it has both maximas and minimas, and it not only has one maxima, it has several maximas and minimas. Okay, unlike the bullet case, or unlike even this case, right? It has only one maximum, and these are the I mean, you won't even call it a minimum, it's just tapering off. And here it has several maximums and several minimums. Okay, so this is coming in from an interference pattern. All right. So obviously, because there is a constructive interference of some of the wavelengths, or some of the between the waves, and then there is destructive interference between some of the waves, like psi1 and psi2. All right. So now, what is the total I? So the total I is obviously not I1 plus I2, because if it had been I1 plus I2, then you would have actually got something like the dotted line, okay, where the intensity is maximum at this point, and everywhere else it is just becoming lower and lower. But it is not, but that is not the profile you see, which means that intensity I is not equal to I1 plus I2. So then what is it equal to? Okay, so I1, if in terms of waves, what is I1 and I2? I1 and I2 is nothing but I1 is psi1 square and I2 is psi2 square, right? Now, in the case of waves, what happens is you cannot just add intensities, but what you are actually adding is the wave functions. So actually, I is nothing but psi1 plus psi2 whole square. This is your intensity, okay? All right. So because interference pattern is observed, it means that you need to add the wave functions and then take its square. That becomes your intensity, instead of first taking the square of the wave function and then adding them. Okay, so this is not correct, but this is correct. So this is just here, I'm just showing you what is psi1 plus psi2 whole square. So how do you get psi1 plus psi2 whole square? Again, you have to take the complex conjugate and then multiply with the original function. So here it will be psi1 plus psi2 whole complex conjugate into psi1 plus psi2. So the complex conjugate, when you take it inside the bracket, you will separately get psi1 star plus psi2 star into psi1 plus psi2. And then you can compute this, right? You can expand it, remove the brackets, and you will get psi1 star psi1 plus psi1 star psi2 plus psi2 star psi1 plus psi2 star psi2. And then this one becomes obviously psi1 square. This becomes psi2 square. And this is the remaining part. And because you only want the real part of because intensity is something that that is the real part of this function. So you only want the real part. So if you see, the real part is nothing but 2 into real of psi1 star psi2. You can actually compute this. Just take psi1 to be some a1 plus ib1, some complex number, and psi2 to be also some complex number, a2 plus ib2, and then you will see that for both of these functions, the real part is the same. Okay, so that's why you have written it as 2 into real of psi1 star psi2. You can do this. So this finally simplifies to, so this is I1 plus I2 plus the remaining part is 2 into root of I1 I2 into cos delta. Okay, so this is the term which causes the oscillating part, which causes the oscillating profile of the intensity. Okay, so this is the term that is responsible for interference pattern. So this delta, this is the phase delta. This delta comes from calculating the distance between the two slits and at what angle the maxima is obtained. Okay, so all of that, I'm not really going to go into what that formula is to calculate delta and stuff, but there is a specific formula, and if you're interested, you can look at it in various books. Okay, so the main takeaway from this is that the resulting intensity, okay, in the case of waves is not equal to just I1 plus I2, but it is equal to I1 plus I2 plus some oscillating term. Okay, and this is because that the resulting intensity I comes from taking psi1 plus psi2 whole square. Okay, that is the important thing to remember. So it's not that the intensities add up, but the wave functions add up. And because the wave functions add up, you can then take the square of the added up wave function, and that gives you the final or the total intensity. Okay, so this is the case for classical particles and waves. Okay, so for classical particles, I is nothing but I1 plus I2, and for waves, it is not equal to I1 plus I2, but it is equal to I1 plus I2 plus 2 into root of I1 I2 into cos delta. So this is the takeaway here. Now we have looked at this, so now we need to look at what happens in the case of quantum particles, right? Because so far we've only talked about classical particles. So let's see what happens in the case of quantum particles. So we'll perform the same experiment, but instead of taking bullets, we will take electrons. Okay, so electron is a quantum particle. Similarly, you can take also neutron, proton, any of these particles you can take. So these will be quantum particles. Okay, so now we'll do this with electron. So again, S is a source of electrons. Okay, so electrons are being emitted from this source S. And in the first experiment, we keep only slit S1 open and S2 is closed. And you see that intensity profile is similar to what we obtained in the case of both particle and wave when one of the slits was closed. So you see that intensity is maximum at this point, and everywhere away from this point, intensity decreases. Similarly, in the second experiment, when only slit 2 is open, then again you see that electrons will have only opportunity to pass through this S2. And so the intensity is maximum here, and it is minimum away from it. Okay. So far it is the same as classical particle and classical wave. There is no change. So where is the change? In the third experiment, you will see the change. So the third experiment is when both slits are open. So when both slits are open and some electrons are passing, so there is a source which emits electrons. So then you see that what happens is, instead of getting a profile which was just one maximum, just like the case of bullets, you are getting an interference pattern. Okay, so interference pattern is a characteristic of waves too, right? We saw that if you have waves, you get interference pattern. If you have particles, you don't get interference pattern. But here electron, we are assuming that it is a particle, right? Because I mean, it is a particle with a certain mass and a certain area that it covers. So it is a particle in that sense, but you see that it is not showing the same profile as the bullet, but it is showing the interference pattern. So we have to try and understand what it is. So if it is showing interference pattern, then obviously I is not equal to I1 plus I2, but I is equal to I1 plus I2 plus that extra oscillating term, right? So in that case, obviously the intensities don't add up, but what adds up are the wave functions. Okay. So by the way, one thing that I forgot to mention here, I think I'd drawn the image. So in the case of waves, how you look at intensities is that you have a photographic plate and you are letting light pass through, right? So when you on the photographic plate, you will see light regions and dark regions alternatively. So that is why you say that here it is a maxima, this is again a minima, this is a maxima, this is a minima, like that. It goes like that. Okay, so similarly, you'll see something like that for electrons as well when both slits are open. On a photographic plate, that is what you'll see, light region and dark region. You can look up such an image on the internet and you'll get an idea what I mean. All right. Okay, so we need to understand how come that when electron is a particle, then how is it that we are getting an interference pattern? Okay. So the only way that we can get interference pattern maybe the case is that electron is splitting into two. Because if you have two slits and you pass a wave, then what happens? The wave just splits into two waves. And then the two waves destructively or constructively interfere with each other. So using that same logic, we can say, okay, is the electron actually splitting into two? Okay, and if it is splitting into two, then is it constructively and destructively interfering with each other? Okay, but electrons actually don't split into two. I mean, it is a particle, so it is not really going to split into two just by the, I mean, unless you apply some high energetic, I mean, electron can convert into something else using like how people do these high energy experiments at CERN, right, with the accelerator and all. But that is a different kind of a thing, right? Here you are not putting any high energy, you're just having a wall which has slits. So how is it going to split? It is not really going to split into anything, okay? So then how can we see what is happening? So, so people thought, okay, let's do one thing. Let's, okay, before I go into that part, people thought, okay, what if the electron source is weak? Okay, so if the electron source is very weak, even then what will happen is, so if the source has very few electrons that it is emitting per second, okay, even then what is happening is there are very few electrons, but still, so there are so few electrons that maybe electrons can go only one by one. Okay, that there are not two electrons going simultaneously or very close to each other. So only one electron will go, then no electron will go, then again one electron will go, something like that. So that is the weak source of electron, and even then you see this interference pattern. Okay. So experiment was carried out with electron beams that were so weak that electrons went one at a time, and even then interference pattern was observed after sufficient distribution. So interference pattern is not dependent on intensity of the beam. So we know that whatever the intensity of the electron beam is here, interference pattern is not really dependent on that. Okay, as long as you are passing some electrons, you are going to see interference pattern. That's what we understand from this. Okay, so again the question anyway is still remains, is the electron splitting or what is happening to the electron? So we can do a fourth experiment to watch the electrons. So what we'll do is we'll watch the electrons. Okay, because if electrons are not really splitting, because even when they're going one by one, you see interference pattern. So let's watch the electron and see what the electron is doing. Okay, so let's look at which slit they went through. Okay, watching the electrons means we have to look at which slit it is going through. Okay, because right now we are only looking at this final photographic plate. We are not looking at which slit the electron is going through. Okay, so but maybe we can perform a fourth experiment where we look at which slit the electron is going through. So this is the experiment. Okay, so we observe, we have a light source, okay, on this wall. So whenever an electron is passing through one of the slit, near that slit, you will see a flash of light. So if it is passing through slit S2, you see a flash of light here. If it passes through slit S1, you see a flash of light here. Okay. And so that way you know which slit the electron is going through. Okay, and over here you have a Geiger counter. Okay, so at this wall you have a Geiger counter. Geiger counter is just something that will have a click sound whenever an electron hits the wall, hits this particular wall. So as soon as it hits this wall, wherever it hits, so in all along the wall there are Geiger counters placed. So wherever it hits, you will hear a sound. So with these two, you know that some electron is passing through and whether some electron is hitting the wall or not. Okay, so this is like your two things. But what you observe is when you start looking at the electron. So once you start looking at which slit the electron is going through, then you see that again that interference pattern is destroyed and you only get this one peak thing, wherein your I is nothing but I1 plus I2. So what is happening? When you're not looking at the electron, you're getting interference pattern. But when you're looking at the electron and seeing which slit it is going through, the interference pattern is destroyed. So what is happening here? So something strange, right? Okay. So what is happening is, so what then people thought, okay, maybe the light is too bright. Let's dim the light, this light source that we have. Let's dim it so that so if you dim the light, what will happen is, you will watch some of the electrons, okay, which are passing through, you will watch them and you will see the flash of light. But you will also miss some of the electrons because the light source is weak, okay. So if you now take two distributions, one distribution for those electrons for which you saw which slit it is passing through, right? For which means for those for which you saw the flash of light here, that is one distribution. And the second distribution for those electrons for which you didn't see the flash of light and they passed through undetected. So if you look at these two distributions, you will see that for those electrons for which you saw which slit they pass through, you see this kind of a intensity profile where I is equal to I1 plus I2. And for those electrons which went undetected, you again see this kind of an interference pattern. So I is not equal to I1 plus I2. Okay. All right. So again, so then what is happening, right? I mean, if you're watching the electron, you are destroying the pattern. If you're not watching the electron, you are retaining the interference pattern. So then people kind of understood that when you're watching the electron, right? Because the only way to watch an electron is to have some light there, right? And what happens is the light is also interacting with the electron, okay? And when the light is interacting with the electron, you're disturbing the electron, okay? And if you're disturbing the electron, then the interference pattern is lost, okay? But if you're not disturbing the electron with light, because the electron is of some wavelength, and the light also has to be of, I mean, light is obviously a wave, so also it is also of that kind of a wavelength, right? So in that case, the wavelengths are small enough that they kind of interact with each other, and you're interfering with the movement of the electron essentially when you're watching it. So that's why when you watch the electron, you are destroying the interference pattern. Okay. So let's, okay, so if the electrons do not split, let's look at which slit they went through. So we can place a strong light behind the wall containing the slit and Geiger counters on the detecting wall. So when electron reaches the wall, we hear a click. Okay. So now since electrons scatter light, whenever they pass through a slit, we see a flash of light near the slit. All right. So this is what we're doing. So what happens is the measurement here is the light, the act of watching the electron. So this kind of measurement interferes with the state of the macroscopic particle. This is the main takeaway here. Okay. So that is what then they thought what to do to minimize the measurement interference. They thought, okay, let us reduce the brightness of the light. Okay, if we reduce the brightness of light, what happens? In this case, we will miss some electrons, but we'll see flash of light in some cases. So we know that some electrons passed even though we didn't see the flash of light because we hear the click at the Geiger counter. So now if we make two distributions, one for those electrons for which we saw a flash, let's call this P1, and others for those we didn't see the flash, P2, then for P1 we see that interference pattern is destroyed, so I is equal to I1 plus I2. And for P2 we see interference pattern where I is not equal to I1 plus I2. So when we do not see the electron, no photon has disturbed it. But when we see it, a photon has disturbed it. Okay. So this is what I mean. So when you actually look at the electron, you destroy the interference pattern. When you don't look at the electron, or when you don't perform that kind of measurement, you are retaining the interference pattern. Okay. So also if you calculate the wavelength from the interference pattern, you will see that it follows the de Broglie relation. And de Broglie relation is what? Lambda is equal to h by p. Okay. So this brings us to an important concept. The concept is that when you actually devise an apparatus that can tell you where the electron is, you kind of destroy, you kind of carry out a lot of change in its momentum. Okay, this is what is known as the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Or in another way, for the electrons that display interference, it is impossible to identify the slit through which they went through, right? Whenever the electrons are displaying interference, at that point we don't know where the which slit the electron went through, which means the microphysical world is indeterministic. Okay, this is the crux of the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which says that it is impossible to design an apparatus which allows us to determine the slit that the electron went through without disturbing the electron enough to destroy the interference pattern. All right. So these are the differences between classical particle and classical wave. Also from these experiments, you notice one thing. It only gives you, so all these experiments that I told you about, right? For example, the Thomson experiment, Davison-Germer experiment, right? Or the photoelectric effect, Compton effect, right? All of these experiments, they either give you the particle nature of quantum particles or they show you the wave nature of the quantum particles. They never show both together. Okay, in any of these experiments, whatever experiment you perform, even the double slit experiment, when you're seeing interference pattern, you know that electron behaves as a wave. When you don't see interference pattern, you know that electron behaves as a particle. But you can never design an experiment which shows you both simultaneously, particle nature and wave nature together. Okay. So which means that particle and wave properties are complementary to one another. When you see one, you won't see the other. When you see the other, you won't see the first one. So they are complementary to each other. Even though both exist, both are behaviors of the same particle, but they are complementary to each other. Okay, so now we have seen the double slit experiment and everything, and we saw the interference pattern and all. But we still don't know why it happens. Okay. So we know now that if you measure or if you try to see which slit the electron is passing through, you are only seeing the particle nature, so which means interference pattern is destroyed. And if you don't bother to see which slit the electron is passing through, then you see the interference pattern, which means the wave nature of the quantum particle is what you are seeing. Okay. So this brings us to something known as linear superposition. Okay, so this tells us why we see that electron is actually showing the interference pattern. So we have already seen earlier that we actually represent electron by a wave function psi. Okay, so psi is a function of position vector and time. So electrons can be represented by the wave function, and this wave function is something which encapsulates both particle and wave nature. Okay. So the question is, in the double slit experiment, why do we see interference pattern in the case of particles such as electron? Okay. Now interference is something that results from superposition of two waves or more than two waves, right? How many ever waves you have. So if there are two slits and if you put two waves coming in from the two slits, the principle of linear superposition states that the total psi, so if the wave emitted by slit S1, slit 1 is psi 1 and the wave emitted by slit 2 is psi 2. So these two psi 1 and psi 2 represent two physically possible states of the system. Okay, so the total function, so the total wave function psi is a linear combination of these two wave functions. So alpha 1 is some constant. So alpha 1 is some complex constant, alpha 2 is some complex constant, and and psi 1 and psi 2 are linearly related, which means some constant into psi 1 plus some other constant into psi 2. Okay, so this is the generally the principle of linear superposition, which means that two waves are linearly combined. Okay, together linearly meaning this psi 1 is this is just psi 1 power 1. It is not psi 1 power 2 or exponential of psi 1 or something. This is just psi 1 and then plus some constant into psi 2 like that. So that is what we mean by linear combination. Okay. So the total wave function psi is a linear combination of psi 1 and psi 2. This is the principle of superposition. So in the case of electron, of course, since at both the slits, we do not have, the same wave is passing through both the slits. What we will do is, we are going to combine, okay, I think I missed a page here. Looks like. Okay, anyway, so the point is for the case of electron, we will have psi is equal to psi 1 plus psi 2. Okay, so when you do that, you are going to, when you want to calculate the intensity, you're going to do psi square, which means you're actually doing psi 1 plus psi 2 whole square. Okay, and if you do this, you are going to get I1 square plus I2 square plus some oscillating term, right? And that is why you see the interference pattern, okay, basically. So this is the principle of linear superposition. So I have one question for you, which you can find out, okay? So, okay, did someone ask something? Okay, someone has asked, if photon from light disturbs electron, how will it reach the screen? Will the electron change momentum or energy due to? Exactly. Okay, so that's what will happen. So I'll talk about this part again. So electron is changing momentum. When photon from the light is disturbing the electron, which means the electron is now changing its momentum. And so it will reach the screen, but the momentum has changed. Okay, and because the momentum has changed, that leads to your uncertainty principle, which I will talk about in a bit. So, but one thing that I want you guys to find out, okay, and think about what will happen if instead of two slits, there are three slits. So, okay, so we have only talked about double slit experiment. But obviously, you can imagine that, people can perform the same experiment with 3 slits, 4 slits, multiple slits, right? Then what will the interference pattern look like? Okay, so think about it and let me know, okay, what is happening or what it is that you found. Okay, all right. So it's an interesting idea, like how the interference pattern is when there are more than 2 slits also. That is also an interesting idea. Okay, so at this point, we complete our double slit experiment. So the main takeaways from the double slit experiment is that intensities add up for classical particles, and that's why you get the total intensity I is equal to I1 plus I2. But for waves, intensities do not add up, but what adds up are amplitudes, which means your total amplitude psi, wave function psi is equal to psi 1 plus psi 2. And this leads to interference. Again, in the case of quantum particle, interference pattern gets destroyed when you try to find which slit the particle is passing through. And in this case, you again get back I is equal to I1 plus I2. But if you don't watch the electron pass through the slit, then you retain the interference pattern. Okay. So we have seen that there is some indeterministic nature about quantum particles, right? First of all, you only get either particle behavior or wave behavior. You don't get both simultaneously. And second thing is interference pattern is destroyed if you watch it. So this shows that the quantum particles are slightly indeterministic. So for a macroscopic particle, so if you compare it with respect to macroscopic particle, according to classical physics, if we know the position vector and the velocity vector, and if we know all the forces acting on the particle, then we can predict where the particle will be at some later time. Okay. So at the current time, if we know what its position is, what its velocity is, what are the different forces acting on the particle, then using Newton's law of motion and all of that, we know where exactly the particle will be 10 seconds later or 1 minute later, right? Whenever we want to know. But such particles, such macroscopic particles for which we can know the trajectory completely and fully, these are called deterministic, right? But quantum particles are not deterministic. Why? Because quantum particles show interference pattern. Therefore, they are represented by the wave function. Now, the property of the wave function is nothing but the wave equation, right? So it is a into e power I5, right? That is your equation of the wave function. So the property of a wave is, you know by definition that a wave is something that cannot be localized in space. So if a wave cannot be localized in space, it means that the quantum particle also cannot be localized. So if you don't know where it is at the current position itself, how can you know where it will be at the next position, at some later time? You cannot know that, right? Because the wave function itself is not localized. So this means that we cannot accurately know its position. Okay. On the other hand, if we try to know its position exactly, like how we watched which slit the electron is coming through. So we watched which slit it is coming through. That means we are trying to see what is the position of the electron. So when we watch the position of the electron, we kind of destroyed the interference pattern. And why we did that and why that happened was because we altered the momentum of the particle just by the mere act of watching it. Okay. So if you watch a car moving by or something moving by or a bullet moving by, you are watching the bullet, but just by the act of watching, you are not changing where the bullet is going, right? You're just an observer from far away who is watching the trajectory of the bullet. But you have not changed the position or anything, the trajectory of the bullet just by watching it. But if you watch the electron, okay, then because you are using some light to watch the electron, and because the electron is so small that the photon and the electron interact together, so the momentum of the electron changes just by the mere act of watching. Which means, so if you know the position, you cannot know the momentum. If you know if you see the wave function itself, if you see the interference pattern, okay, that means you do not know the position accurately. So this brings us to the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. So Heisenberg's uncertainty principle states that if the x component of the momentum of a particle is measured with an uncertainty delta px, then its x position cannot at the same time be measured more accurately than delta x, which is equal to h cross by 2 delta px. So similarly for y and z, which means you cannot simultaneously measure position and momentum of the particle with arbitrary accuracy. So the limit for the accuracy is this. So delta x into delta px is greater than or equal to h cross by 2. This is the limit of the accuracy measurement. Okay, and similarly for delta y and delta py and delta z for delta pz. Okay. Right. So this I've already told you. So if you look at a macroscopic object, the light that hits your eye, our detector, does not change the motion of the macroscopic object. But to observe an electron, you need the radiation. You need to use radiation of very short wavelength, the size of an atom. The energy of this radiation is high enough to alter the momentum of the electron. So just observing it changes its momentum and affects its motion completely. Therefore, it's impossible to determine position and momentum simultaneously to arbitrary accuracy. Okay, so I think, right, I think I'll finish this part and then we can stop. Okay, so if a particle is localized, okay, its wave function would become right. If a particle is localized, its wave function would become zero everywhere else except for that point, right? Because that if the wave function is spread out, it means the particle is not localized. If the wave function is only has some value at that particular point and everywhere else it is zero, that means the wave function is localized. Okay, so has to be a zero here. So if a particle is localized, its wave function would become zero everywhere else, and its wave would then have very short wavelength, right? Okay, because the wave function is zero everywhere else, which means the wavelength becomes very, very small. So if the wavelength is very small, it means the energy is very high. Okay, then according to de Broglie relation, P is equal to h by lambda. So the momentum would become very high if the wavelength is very small. So if the particle is localized, that is delta x tends to 0, then delta px will tend to infinity. That is what you get from this de Broglie relation also. So Heisenberg's uncertainty principle also applies to any pair of complementary dynamical variables. And another pair of complementary variables are energy and time. So again, you see that for delta E into delta T greater than equal to h cross by 2. Okay, so if you so what is delta T here? Delta T is the time between any two successive energy measurements. Okay, so if we make two measurements of energy of the system, and if these measurements are separated by a time interval delta T, the measured energy will differ by an amount delta E, which can be no smaller than h cross by 2 delta T. Okay, why does this happen? You can see that if you measure the energy once, okay, then the act of merely measuring something makes the system perturbed. Okay, so if the system is perturbed and in the same perturbed system you make another measurement within a short span of time, then the system did not have enough time to go back to its unperturbed state, right? And so the the accuracy of the energy will become questionable, basically. Okay, so if delta T between two successive measurements is large, delta E will be small. Basically, it means that after the first measurement is carried out, it takes a long time for the system to return to its unperturbed state. That's why if the delta T is large, so the time difference between successive measurements is large, then your uncertainty in energy will be small. But if you don't wait long enough for the system to, come back to the unperturbed state, then the energy, your uncertainty in energy or the error in energy is going to be very large. This is what it means. Okay. So this relation is generally useful when you want to study some decay process or you want to see what is the mean lifetime of the process or something like that, or the energy width of the excited state, then you know what is the limit that you will get. And you can use this relation to get that limit. Okay, so the homework problem here is estimate the resolution of a microscope that uses electron of energy 175 electron volt. So this is something that you need to find out. What is the resolution of a microscope that uses electron of energy 175 electron volts? So I think you can do this homework problem now. So one thing I want to tell you about, because we are learning quantum mechanics. So we are learning quantum mechanics, right? So there is something you might have heard a lot, or if you have not heard so far, it is something that you will keep hearing again and again at various times, at least as long as you're doing, you are in college and even later. So that is something known as a Schrodinger's cat. Okay, so Schrodinger's cat is something that it's just a thought experiment that Schrodinger was using to explain the concept of superposition to Einstein. Okay, so he was saying that, so I think you should go and read it up on Wikipedia or somewhere. But the main thing is this. So what he said was, okay, imagine an experiment where you put a cat inside a box and there is a Geiger counter which is connected to a hammer, and the hammer can land on some flask which has some poisonous gas. So the Geiger counter will only click if there is a radioactive decay of the atom. So there is one atom which will decay, which will produce some radioactive decay thing. So if there is decay, then the Geiger counter will hit the hammer, or the hammer will hit the flask, and the poisonous gas will be released. And because of the poisonous gas, the cat will be dead. But the atom does not decay all the time. It happens, there is a very long time at which it will decay. So it may decay immediately or it may decay later. Okay, because there is an average time, but it may decay earlier or later. Okay, so if there is no decay of that atom, radioactive atom, then the Geiger counter will not hit the hammer will not hit the conical flask, and so cat will not die. So the thought experiment here was that, I mean, obviously no cat was harmed here, but just the thought experiment was that if you do not open the box, you don't know whether the cat is dead or alive. Similarly, like your electron and double slit, right? So if you do not watch the electron, you see the interference pattern, which means that is coming from superposition of the two states. So here, if you do not open the box, the cat is in a superposition of the two states, which is dead state and alive state. But if you open the box, then you know for sure whether the cat is dead or alive. So it goes to one of the states, right? So this is something that this is like a thought experiment he was using to explain to Einstein what it means what you mean by the superposition principle. Okay, so there are many jokes about Schrodinger's cat, and you will hear it again and again, even in movies, even in popular media. I think if you watch Big Bang Theory also, I think you hear it several times. So all of this, that is just something, it's just a thought experiment, but it became very popular. And so people started using it as a joke. But obviously, this kind of superposition principle applies only to quantum particles and not to classical particle like a cat. Okay, cat is obviously a classical particle, so it does not apply to a cat, but it applies to quantum particles. Okay, so you can go and read it up on Wikipedia or somewhere what it means to be a Schrodinger's cat, and it will explain to you. All right, so I will stop here, and then tomorrow we will look at the physical interpretation of the intensities and all of that, and the wave function.